Who are we, you ask? We are the podcast seeking out a better understanding of all things paranormal. We'll have guests from all backgrounds in the paranormal with us along this journey, with Q&As for listeners to ask paranormal experts their questions, and open call-in nights to let listeners discuss their thoughts and experiences on the paranormal. But the question remains, can the unexplained be explained? Or can the paranormal be nothing more than perception? So, close the curtains and turn out the lights and join us on the journey into the paranormal. This is Paranormal Engaged with your host, Adam Young, coming to you from the beautiful Evergreen State.
And welcome back to Paranormal Engaged. And we are going to be welcoming back Marilynn Hughes here. She's back with us to talk about spiritual warfare, angels and demons, where good and evil collides. So, Marilynn, welcome back with us once again.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
Awesome. So you had an experience, if I remember rightly, you were flying over a particular city. What did you experience?
Well, that one was many years ago, but it was, and you'll see this a lot in the mystical spheres when you're having out-of-body experiences. You engage with the principalities and powers of both good and evil, spirits of both darkness and light, spirits that have elements of both. And so you are engaging with not just the physical world, but all of these elemental beings that are existing in, around, and among us. That most, a lot of people do not see or are not aware of, but they are very, very present with us. And so in this particular experience you're referring to, and I've had many of these types of experiences, because as you are in these out-of-body states, you're going to fly through cities, you're going to fly through towns, you're going to fly through localities. And so you're going to experience what the energy of different places might be. So in this particular experience, I was going over a large American city, and it was very, very inundated with demons. It was so inundated with demons, I would call it like, what would you compare it to? I mean, it was literally a horde. In the air above the city, you're looking at working your way, moving through a horde of demons. It would be like, no space between them. Think of, what do you call that? Literally a mass conflagration of the demonic. Mm-hmm. And it was so...
like a very thick cloud.
Yeah, very much, and very compacted, and it was so intensely compacted. They were so tightly woven together. It took every ounce of energy that you had. It was a totally exhausting experience to try to move through that area of energy to just either get in there or get out, because the space was just so inundated with evil. And this is important in part because what we don't realize is how much these principalities and powers of good and evil are interacting in our daily lives, and how they are impacting us as human beings, and the way that we allow them to impact our behavior, our thoughts, our deeds, our actions, our words. And we see this so much in the physical realm because of the fact that so many souls, so many people are in denial about the interaction of the spiritual world with the physical world, that people can be literally being affected and then infested by demonic types of energies, demonic types of spirits and demons themselves without even realizing it. And so our behaviors are being profoundly affected by what we see up in the ethers, so to speak. So in this particular city, it was completely inundated with demonic forces.
So during this experience, I mean, when you were coming, did you see it coming? And what was your initial reaction to that? What did you do to protect yourself as you went through this horde of demonic energy?
Well, you have to like hold in your light. There's a whole slew of things you do. You have to hold in your light, and the reason that you do that, and this is something that you also do when you are asked to go into the purgatorial, or especially when you go into the lower hell realms. The reason being that if you don't hold in your light, the demons will be able to spot you, and the minute they spot you, they will take you down. So you have to hold in your light, but there's a constant prayer of the heart that has to be coming out of you. But literally, there is no, these are true battles. They're not just, guaranteed outcomes. So these are things where even if you're doing everything right, even with the continuous flow of prayer coming from your spirit, mind, heart, and soul, you're literally going to be battling through something like that to get all the way through. And, you'll come out the other end, possibly, you will be totally exhausted. And you have to be very aware also of the fact that you could be contaminated because you're moving through a contaminated source of energy.
Right. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would venture to say that, ironically, we're talking right now while there's a lot of rioting going on in the streets of America. Ironically, it's not an asimilar situation to some of the things that were happening at the time of this out-of-body experience a couple of decades ago. And what I don't think people realize is they are responding to very primitive and very, very base and darker elemental instincts. They're not, it's like taking a noble cause and committing evil in its name. And what's happening is this, you can see the very same conditions on the ground that would give us cause to believe that if we went into the mystical and observed above some of these same locations, that we might see the exact same thing right now, because the purpose of these demonic forces is to rile up violence, hatred, and racial wars, and people just having complete abandon to all reason or thought. And so what one of the things that you would have to look at here is committing evil in the name of good is still a commission of evil. And what we are seeing as a recurrent pattern in our American landscape is that people are taking what was originally intended as the right to peaceful protest, and they have taken it to the point of the right to violent commission of multiple felonies against other people, their businesses, their persons, against their own towns, their own cities. And I think people need to actually look at that, because if they take a deeper look at this, it's very clear what's happening. Destroying your own hometown, your own city, is a destructive action. It's a backwards flow. This is something that is coming from the dark side. It's coming from evil. That is not a constructive or a creative work. And the only things that come from God are constructive and creative works. The destructive actions that we see, those come from the evil influences, the dark side. So as people are, excuse me, getting upset about a legitimate wrongdoing that was another evil, they have to think about the proper way to respond. There's a difference between peaceful protest and working towards the justice that needs to happen for a person, and that is one thing. But commission of multiple felonies against the property, the people, the persons, and destroying your own cities and your own hometowns, that very action itself tells you that you are reacting to a demonic force, not a force for good. A force for good is always going to be creative. It will move forward. It will be cooperative in bringing forth a greater good that will serve all. It will not create more victims. It will not create more destruction. It will go after the proper dispensation of justice for the situation at hand, but it will be peaceful, and there's a huge difference here. But this is part of why it's important, ironically, that you bring this up,
Right.
because that's one of the things that we see as a result of this. Because in our world, in the United States, I'll just talk about in the United States in particular, since that's where I'm at. We have been energizing and bringing in a lot of evil and destruction for quite a very long time. We live in a mortal realm. This is the realm where the battles between good and evil reside. They happen outside of us. They also happen inside of us.
Right.
And what we are seeing right now is literally the unleashing of this massive destruct energy. And it's come about through some of the things we've seen in the pandemic. It's coming about as people are responding inappropriately to, not just inappropriately, but truly violently and criminally against their own people, against their own homes, against their own cities and towns. And they're acting against one another rather than trying to create a unity where people can work together. All of this stuff is coming from this huge amount of dark energy that has been, energized and brought in by humankind for quite some time now. And that's where we would just remind people, you can read about this in my books as well. And by the way, I do have a book called Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons. It's in the Mystic Knowledge series. You can read it for free. It's at outofbodytravel.org. You can download it under Out of Body Books. But the thing that people need to understand about energy is that every time we have a good thought, we are literally giving permission for the angels of virtue to come around us. When we have an evil thought or a dark thought, a thought of vice, we are giving permission for the demons of those vices or spirits of those vices to be around us. And so this is how we've brought these things down. So when I'm talking about we have brought these things in for quite some time, that's what I'm talking about. We're dealing with a long-term hatred, violence, not trying to understand one another, not trying to work in unity with one another. One of the things I was told in early on in my spiritual journey that I think is relevant to all of us and is extremely important is that it is not for you to be understood. It is for you to be understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And if every one of us would step forth into the role of trying to be more understanding, not, just vehemently, calling out for, the idea that I must be understood, but rather I want to understand you, and I want you to understand me if you are in that space. And then we, by people reaching out, wanting to understand one another, that is how we create a creative unity where things can be done very differently, and so this is where you see the difference of how energy is then generated and brought into this realm, and what we are generating, bringing around each of us individually, but also what we're bringing around our cities, our towns, and our general locations,
Right.
based on the way that we think and what we say and do.
Absolutely. And with in light of what you were saying, I actually wound up with a conversation online, and they were talking about, well, peaceful protest isn't doing it. And one of the things, and the whole deal is, because I don't believe, and I do not advocate this police brutality, and this kind of oppression that's going on. These injustices, it can't be allowed to continue. But, and you're right, protests will only go so far. But even though we're looking for that immediate response now, we have to look at the long term of it. And this lady, I'm not going to mention her by name, but she posed a very, very important question. And I think it's something that each and every one of us here as an American people need to look at. Okay. So how do we go about it? Well, burning your cities to the ground, to me, is not the answer. You can reserve your right to disagree with me, and you know what? That's okay. I'll respect that, because that's the American way. But we have systems in place to combat this, and I don't think it's being utilized the way it should be. When our country was founded, it was founded on we the people, meaning
Right.
that the American people are to govern. And to me, it's like that has been forgotten. We haven't been governing, and this is the outcome of it. And we need to get together. We need to break down these boundaries between each other as people, and break down this hatred. Come together as a people, and let's start governing our nation again, and bring it back to the way that we want it to be. This is how we do a long-term solution. If we don't get together and we don't start, the American people, they can draft bills. They can be a part of the lawmaking process, but you got to take the effort to do so. And I believe in the American people. We are a great nation. We stand together as strong. I mean, look at what we've just done. Just yesterday, we sent 2 astronauts for the first time in decades with brand new tech. If we are able to do that, we can almost do anything. As long as we
Right.
come together and be united, we can change the laws. And we got to educate ourselves on laws, find the flaws in it. Let's start taking the power out of the government and put it back in our hands like it was originally supposed to be in the first place. And
Well, and I think that one of the things that people are missing in this is that we do have certain things that are in place, and we do have certain things that may not be in place. But we have to, part of, going back to this idea of, we are not to be understood, but we are to be understanding,
Mm-hmm.
is that we need to look at these things from all sides of the story.
Yes.
So, first of all, we do have laws in place that are going to allow for the prosecution of those involved in this hideous crime.
Yes.
So we do have that, but we also need to understand that the prosecution of crimes in America takes a certain amount of time, because we did create a system of laws to protect people from being maliciously prosecuted. So there is a considered approach. You have to prove, you have to have your evidence in place before you file charges. So
Yes.
burning the cities down for a week before they can be filed is clueless.
Right.
But if you also, but let's go to the other side of this, okay? So we have in place laws. What we definitely are seeing is that one of the things that is going to be very helpful is that there has been a problem. If something is not caught on video, that things can be covered up.
Mm-hmm.
But that is also, we have to understand, that is a problem not just with a police officer who might be corrupt,
Mm-hmm.
but that is a problem with all criminals, because they do that too. So we have that as a problem, and that exists. Justice is not absolute in a mortal realm. So we understand that. So let's continue bringing our understanding around. So then we also have to understand that taking the life of a man whose life was snuffed out, immorally and improperly, does not justify destroying the life of another man who was doing his job as a police officer in another city, or destroying the businesses of our fellow citizens. We have, we need to see some outcry as well for the death of this other black man who was fighting on the side of law enforcement, who was killed in San Francisco. He was equally killed unjustly, and this was by the hands of the rioters. We have lost all perspective. So now let's take a look at New York City. We have a city where, I don't even know how many police officers. It was hundreds of police officers that were trying to keep the city safe during the pandemic. At least 30 officers, and that's probably a low number because I don't have the final numbers. At least 30 officers died from COVID-19 trying to protect people. And at least 30 more officers last night were seriously injured and hospitalized last night over rioting. Yeah. It's like, give them a break. There are the majority of police officers are doing their job and doing it well, just like the majority of all human beings are trying to do their job and do it well. You don't discredit an entire line of people because there is corruption in one. It's no less unjust than going after the entire Catholic priesthood because you have 78 or whatever they came up with. I know that there were at least confirmed, and my numbers are off. I don't have them in front of me, and I don't know the exact numbers. But you don't demoralize the Catholic priesthood because there are some priests who did horrible things in the commission of what should have been their duty. Right. So it's just as stupid where you are taking And it would be just as dumb to say, okay, we found somebody who was a horrible child abuser. That means all parents are horrible. And that would literally include probably 95% or more of us. And we would appreciate that kind of generalization. And so let's pull that back to now understanding, taking this into understanding. There's no question that this is a situation that needs to be addressed. The irony is that the Attorney General of the state is addressing it, and he is also a black man. We remember that none of these things really matter in terms of this idea that somehow this particular officer finds all law enforcement officers is true and just. Just as the idea that the death of the victim people are rioting over, that his death is more important than the death of the FBI agent who also died unjustly. They were both unjustly killed.
Right.
All the people who lost their businesses due to the pandemic were no less or more just than the people who are losing their businesses because of people who are committing acts of evil against their businesses.
Right.
We are all personally accountable for our actions. St. Catherine of Siena said, long ago, hundreds of years ago, that you must never commit a sin for the sake of committing a good. And I think people should put that before themselves and look closely at what we are seeing.
Yes.
We are seeing acts of destruction, violence, a lot of hatred that is literally just being thrust through the souls and bodies of many, many people and out into our society. Hatred that has become, there is no less of a problem with hatred, whether it's racial hatred or if it's hatred because people are police officers or hatred because people are something else. You know what I mean?
Right.
Literally, there's no difference. It's still hatred, and hatred is an evil, and hatred always consumes a society. So you see what we see in the film that's coming to us from with the rioting in the streets is this literal, completely blind hatred that's coming from rioters towards people who have nothing to do with the event which occurred, that they are claiming that they are protesting. They're not protesting, they are rioting. They are committing multiple felonies for which normally they would go to prison. We're seeing people that are literally climbing on top of police cars and using sledgehammers, and this is stuff you go to prison for. We've had a police officer murdered. We've had police officers injured. We've seen a lot of efforts to show restraint and let people get out their anger. But what's not happening here is perspective or understanding. The fact that there's nothing that makes what happened okay.
Right.
There's also nothing that makes the process that we have as Americans, the judicial process, move faster.
Right.
There's also, and the reason we have that process is because we created a system of law that provided us with certain protections from being prosecuted from malicious prosecution. So it takes a few days, it takes a week or two, because the prosecution has to have the evidence at hand to file those charges.
Right.
There's a reason why we have those things in place. The fact that we now have the technology to make things visible that were previously hidden is a new and very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many things like these that have happened throughout the history of humanity. There are many hidden crimes, and they're not all committed by a police officer. In fact, the majority of them are not, but, throughout the decades that I've been on the earth, there are a lot of very, very unjust things that happen in our world. It happens through war. It happens through criminal acts. It happens through rape. It happens by the hands of serial killers. It happens through the hands of drunken drivers. It happens through the hands of rage. The majority of murders in our society are caused when someone is in a state of rage. And they, so it's the crimes of violence are often committed. They're crimes of passion, when someone is very upset, very angry. And the reason that's important is because what is that fueled by?
Right.
It's fueled by these darker forces that are swarming above many of our American cities. And they're swarming there because we are drawing them in through our very own thoughts, our very own words, our deeds, and what we are thinking. We aren't doing the work that we are sent here to do when we incarnate, which is the purification of those elements within ourselves that are remaining in the dark energies. We are supposed, we come to this world knowing we have elements of both good and evil, both elements of both darkness and light. And our job here is to purify of those things which are of the darkness, so that we can move forward as we move through this cycle of life, by having achieved the level of purification required. But if we are actually going backwards and just generating and pulling in all this hatred, anger, rage, we're going backwards. And we are pulling in more darkness, more evil, and more of those elements.
Right.
We're responsible for doing that. But I guess in terms of going back to understanding, I think what I would like to have people look at here, because this is a very hard thing for people to deal with. There is no excuse for the unjust murder of any person. But where's the outrage for the unjust murder of all those others? All those people who have died because of the wars throughout, the unjust death of our soldiers, the unjust death of the Syrian people, the unjust death that's occurring all over the Middle East, the unjust things that we are seeing worldwide. Even just 10 years ago, we were seeing so much unjust death with ISIS being so pronounced. we have to recognize that this is part of the problem.
Yes.
We don't want to make the problem worse. You know, when people start rioting in the streets, they are only making the job of police officers harder. And they make the chance of police brutality or police overreaction. This particular situation doesn't apply, but it makes it more likely that there will be mistakes made because the police don't know when people are going to erupt and become a danger.
Mm-hmm.
When people are rioting in the streets and doing the crazy things that they're doing, which are all felonies under normal jurisdiction, they're felonies.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you're creating. So you're creating a problem where the police have to be afraid of the people, and the people are trying to say they're afraid of the police. And they're both right,
Mm-hmm.
and they're both wrong. That's the problem. We have to both understand they're both right and they're both wrong. Because the reality is, most police officers are trying to do their job to the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm.
I believe most people who are trying to protest, who are trying to actually peacefully protest, are trying to do something of value and worth.
Yes.
But there are a lot of people who have gotten caught up in the moment who are not doing that at all.
Right.
And they are not behaving in a manner that is, I don't see how they see their behavior as in any way helpful to the cause of this poor man who lost his life.
Absolutely.
Because all they're doing is actually creating more fear, more tension between police and the people, and vice versa. And it's so it's a circular event, which is, you know, the demons up above in that little horde we started talking about.
Right.
They're laughing and enjoying it. They're like, this is exactly what we wanted. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. You know, and that's just it, you know, and it boils down to understanding it, and it boils down to, we got to stop the destruction and the wanting and willing to destroy, and come together and find the right solution, the right long-term solution. So things that happen to, like, George Floyd and others don't happen anymore. If we don't get together on the same page, and we don't start reviewing our laws or looking at what the root problem is and fixing it as a whole, if we of the American people can't get together,
is, I think we do have laws in place for it.
We do.
I think the problem is that it's been a hidden thing, and now it's becoming something that we now see because of the advent of cell phones and the video possibilities, where things could have been more hidden in the past. They're coming to light. You know, even in decades past, when I was a younger woman, I would hear about occasional, and I want to make sure this is clear, because again, most police officers are very good people who are doing an excellent job, and I think that the New York Police Department has been showing amazing restraint. But even, I've been around for a while, so in the decades from the time I was a young woman, we would hear of cases where women would be raped on a traffic stop. It would be, I maybe heard of it 2 or 3 times, but you had to be careful. But these were hidden crimes. This isn't the first time in history that we have crimes that have been hidden. This is just the first time in history where we have technological tools that are making it harder to hide a lot of things. And so this generation is not new to injustice. Injustice has always existed.
Correct.
It's just that we are now seeing some of it
Yes.
in ways that we didn't before.
Right.
And so, there were probably a lot of cases like these back in the 60s, in the 50s. And, we knew nothing of them because back then that was pre-civil rights. And so we have to put things in context of the fact that, no, it's not okay. And I feel like what I have seen from the officials in Minnesota has been a very strong effort. The Attorney General of the state has been very, very clear and upfront about exactly what they're doing to get the judicial process going in these cases against the perpetrators. But I see a clear impatience of the people to allow for that process to take place.
Right.
And we have to remember that process protects all of us from unjust prosecution. And just because it may take a week or two for them to have the charges fully vetted does not mean that they will not be held accountable, because they will. They will. It's just that we have a system that allows for the protection of all of us from being unjustly prosecuted. So they have to go over the videotapes. They have to talk to the witnesses. They have to make sure that there is a reason for this. And we have to remember, I know this isn't a popular thing to say, but some of the other cases that actually did cause a lot of rioting in the streets were actually when they were actually taken to trial and the facts were uncovered in the case. And that is very unlikely to be the case here because it's all caught on video. But you have situations in some of these cases where they were not what it appeared or what people thought. And that there were, because police officers do have a unique situation where sometimes self-defense does come into play. And there have been cases where that has been found to be justified.
Yes.
So we can't just say that every time this happens,
right,
that they have bad intentions or that this person probably did, but I don't know that. I'm just going to allow the process to unfold. I saw the video, and it's extremely condemning. So we'll let the judicial process vet that out. I'm not going to do it. It's not my role. But my point is that we are responsible for what we are generating.
Absolutely.
And we are generating a lot of really profoundly negative things. It makes absolutely no sense, especially here. If why would anybody think it's helpful to destroy your neighbors' businesses, destroy your own hometown, your own city streets, your own city, burn down buildings, burn out other people's cars? People there, we already have like 40 million plus out of work. Why is this a good idea to anybody? This is obviously an act of evil. And so evil can sometimes beget more evil. And we all have to be careful because there can be a natural instinct within us, because we get enraged, we get upset. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference between justifiable anger and when evil is begetting another evil. But if we are causing more destruction and more harm, we are actually bringing in those hordes, those demonic forces above.
Yes.
If we want to actually deal with the issue behind this action, what happened, we obviously need the judicial system to follow its due course. But let's talk about it from a spiritual sense.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about it from what do we need to do to make that become less of a common occurrence, we have to remember, let's just remind again, it's our job to be understanding, not to be understood. So we're going to do some understanding here. Injustice has always occurred in our world because it is a mortal realm where the battles between good and evil reside. We cannot expect that we will completely eradicate all acts of evil from it. We probably will not do that here.
Right.
And what we have to remember as well is that evil begets more evil. So if your response to evil is more evil, then your point is lost on the universe. So what has to happen spiritually is that the energetic part of this requires us to realize that bringing in the assistance from the angelic side requires us to cultivate more that comes from the virtues and the side that would bring in the angels of virtue. And that would be things like prudence, fortitude, temperance. All of these things are totally lacking on our city streets right now. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And these things require us to also, faith, hope, and charity being love. And the greatest of these is charity being love. So this is what Christ told us. The greatest of these is love. So what are we doing? We are literally, we look like a hell realm right now. If you ever travel mystically to a hell realm, it looks an awful lot like what we're seeing in our city streets right now. Right. So this is not what we're doing. We're not generating faith, hope, and charity and or love. Love requires us to understand that from a grander sphere, the energetic understanding, skin color is totally irrelevant. This is such a grounded issue. It's so unimportant. It's completely irrelevant. Our spiritual being is not in any way tied to what color our skin is. We can incarnate in many flasks. And sorry, I've got to turn this thing off.
That's okay.
But we can incarnate in many flasks, and in fact, part of the reincarnation process involves us taking on the role of living as many, many different races so that we can understand the different perspectives of having lived in many different races. So in my own tree, I have a lot of Native American lifetimes. I've experienced being black, being a black slave, being in Middle Eastern countries, being in all sorts of different, European cultures, and also, ancient cultures and all those kinds of things. So what you find is that this focus and emphasis that we have on people's race and skin color is so irrelevant in the spiritual sense. It's almost like I hope I don't minimize this by saying this because I'm not trying to, but it really is. It's like a 3-year-old, a couple of 3-year-olds fighting over which color of Lego they want to play with. It's that irrelevant. It's just not important. We incarnate as soul. Our soul does not correspond or in any way reflect, what color we are that this time around. Many people who, ironically, what I was shown through mystical experiences many years ago was that many of the SS soldiers from the time of World War II had reincarnated as white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also see, like, from the time of the late 19th century, people who were cavalry officers have reincarnated as Native Americans, and those who were Native Americans have reincarnated as white people. Part of the reason this happens is so that we, as a soul, gain that perspective of all experience.
Mm-hmm.
But the purpose of gaining that perspective is to understand the unimportance of those things. Mm-hmm. The importance lies in the soul itself. And so that goes back to the fact that life matters, and a lot of people are starting to say that now. But life matters, and that then we have to take that even farther, because that extends beyond human beings. And so then we have to go into the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and even the kingdom of the minerals, because life matters itself.
Right.
So that's what we are objecting to, is the infringement on life itself. Mm-hmm. And yes, when there is any type of discrimination that is based on race, which we know still exists, mm-hmm. And still happens, as unfortunate and kind of sad, considering how long this has been going on. It is, but we know that it still goes on. Yes. But when that's going on, it's an infringement on that person's life force itself. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to go to the extent of taking someone's life to be an infringement upon their life force. Mm-hmm. Discrimination itself is an infringement. Slavery is an infringement on someone's life force. Mm-hmm. The many societal structures that our world and our species has worked through over the many millenniums show these different barriers that we've worked to break down. Mm. In India, the caste systems, you have different examples of it worldwide. There's still the gap that we see, especially in certain cultures, between male and female. All the same types of just unnecessary, but I guess earthly grounded things that we can get very caught up in here. Mm-hmm. But I apologize. I did go on quite a tirade there. So.
So, with that being said, like we said, we don't condone the violence. It's not necessary, and we're not minimalizing the injustice. Not only in this case, but in every case that happens
in all
every
the
day.
Cases, in the cases where it's not on film,
right?
Or the cases where it's not known,
exactly.
And as well as the cases that go in the other direction. Absolutely. The injustices that have been done to police officers, right. The injustices that go both ways.
Absolutely.
And you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and I totally agree. And the whole thing, I guess what I'm getting at is we have to go about this the right way. It is too important not to get it right. And you're right. these riots, this wanton taking of life and destruction of property is not the way to do it. We have to do it the right way because it is too important not to. So with that, we'll kind of steer back towards what we were going to, it all ties in, but, let's just kind of get back to it. So let's take a moment and talk about angels and what their work is and how are they combating this as we're seeing it. I mean, how are they combating these demons and stuff that have just kind of overtaken everything?
Well, the angelic hierarchy is allowed to participate in human events as much as our prayers and our compatibilities give rise to. So when people pray, and they really pray from the heart, they're really generating literally the line of permission that brings the angels in to help battle these types of forces. But they're also, when people are thinking and purifying and bringing forth the types of thoughts which are more compatible with working in unity, working towards creating something better rather than destroying, working towards this understanding that needs to occur. It needs to happen from all sides, not just one side, but all sides, where there has to be this understanding, the willingness to listen to the experience of the other. When we start doing that, we are giving rise through our own compatibility, because that brings the permission in for the angelic hosts to come in and combat, because we are the ones who literally generate which is going to have the dominance here. We're generating it by our thoughts, our prayers, our lack thereof, or our complete disregard, whichever it is. So the angelic hierarchy is always very much involved, but it's in a different way. And it happens in a sphere that is like, if you could see me now, I'm trying to, with my hands, I talk with my hands a lot. There's a sphere that resides above the ground, above the earthly vibration, and it is in this sphere of higher vibration where there is a peaceful vibration, where many people who pray and who have out-of-body or mystical experiences will go and experience these things. And it is up here where there is this peaceful vibration. It's kind of like the universal consciousness. And this is where a lot of the peaceful stuff is generated and then allowed to come down into the below, which is where we are. But whether it's, the level to which it is able or allowed to come into the below is very dependent upon our own efforts. And some of those things, some of those safeguards have been removed from us at this time. And the reason for that is because when humankind falls so far away from God, when we refuse to stop offending God, when we refuse to respond to the things that the Lord places before us and creates for us so that we are able to actually begin to cultivate a higher ideal. If we just ignore it all and we don't do anything about it, and we, not only that, but then we literally, it's like it becomes throwing pearls before swine.
Mm-hmm.
And so there does come a point where that protection sometimes is withdrawn just a bit,
Yes.
where chastisements do come in more so, and they come in and they're allowed to happen. It's kind of like the angelic protection that we're used to having, but we don't even realize we're having it because we're just doing what we do, and the angels are working so hard to keep us from literally paying the consequences of our ignorance and the things that we keep doing. But we don't even realize it. We have no gratitude. We stop praying. We stop beseeching God. We stop seeking Him. We stop doing the work of, cultivating our own conscience. We stop doing the work of even requiring ourselves to really think things out.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to this point, there are times when, and we've seen this prophesied about many times in Marian apparitions, and this time has also been talked about in many of the Marian apparitions and by many Catholic mystics right now, who are speaking of the times that we are in right at this time,
Mm-hmm.
which is, that some of that has been withdrawn. And so we're kind of like sitting in our own stuff, our own crap,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't like it very much, so it's kind of like when you have it's kind of like when you have a child, a 4-year-old or something, and you're trying to teach them, you're trying to tell them, and you're doing everything you can to protect them from something, and then at some point you are like, okay, well, I'm going to, like, let's take something simple that isn't confusing. Like, okay, you tell them to clean up their room, they don't help. They don't, 4-year-olds, maybe they don't know how to clean up as much, but let's say a 6 or 7-year-old, and so eventually what you do is you let them sit in their own mess. It's like, okay, well, mom's not going to clean it up for you anymore. See how you like it, and so even though a lot of kids would probably say they don't care, but and that's kind of what's happening here on Earth as well, because we don't know any better to care, but that's kind of what's happening, where it's pulled back and we have to actually experience the consequences of our own generations.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is our own generations is what we are generating in our own life, in our own world, and everywhere around us. So there is a little bit of pulling back on that. But it doesn't mean that the protection is not always available. People are not doing what we've been asked to do. And it's really that simple. If people start praying more, everyone, anyone who just wants to alter that a little bit, just if they begin to start praying more, it's going to change that for them and then for others on a greater scale. And that's just the beginning point. So it's, there's a process that we need to undergo, and that's this purification process. And it requires us to pray, to meditate, to contemplate. It requires us to engage in spiritual reading, to do the things that will help us to form our conscience, to help us to actually cultivate the way that we think, so that
Yes.
we will actually improve upon ourself, our soul, during this lifetime here. And so since so many of us have fallen away from that, we're seeing the results of that. But it really isn't that hard to change it. Any single human individual can just start that process, and they can change it in their own life. But the more people who are like, wow, yeah, I can do that,
Mm-hmm.
it could literally change the world.
Right.
But we have to remember, this is a mortal realm. you mentioned earlier before we went on the air, you wanted to talk about the universal sphere of realms.
Yeah, I
and
was
this is
actually
a good
getting ready to
place
ask you about
talk
that.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
in
a great
fact, you
place
had
to talk
mentioned.
about it.
So actually, my question is to that, because you had a bring back to your mentioning of these. You call it the sphere of vibrations. So is that part of the universal sphere of realms that we're fixing to talk about?
The sphere of vibrations.
Mhm.
Yes, that's definitely part of it.
Okay.
I'm going to probably talk about a more simplified version, but I'll try to expand upon it as much as I can. It's hard to explain because it is such a vast thing. It's so beautiful, but it's yeah. So the yeah. So yeah, is that the question?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. We can talk about that. So yes, the so I spoke about the universal sphere of realms before, and I've written about it a lot in my books. But this is this beautiful thing. It was shown to me early on in my journey, and then I would see it many times throughout. And I've been having these out of body experiences for now over 34 some years in my adult life. It's more if you go back to when I was a child, but long story there. But so I was shown how this universal sphere of realms works. There's a simplified version, which I'll explain right now, and then I'm just going to explain some of this of how it expands as you go through the spiritual evolution. So the universal sphere of realms is, if you imagine just like concentric circles, a series of concentric circles, and you have in the center ring is total darkness. And then your first sphere is the first realm, the first dimension. The second realm is the second dimension, and these are both lower realms. These would be the hell realms that people talk about, where you are in varying degrees of darkness. And one of the things that my books go into a lot more detail about is you have different levels of darkness. You have acts that are generated by ignorance, and that is a lesser evil than acts that are generated from a true intention and desire to cause harm to another person or others or something. And then you have the third level of evil, which is that you actually derive pleasure from inflicting pain. And so you have these three levels, and you'll see that in the second and first realm, the first realm being where you have the darkest evil resides there. And down there is also where you have a lot of the people who are involved in the real satanic ritual type of worship. These are the people who are not doing it just because they're ignorant and young and stupid, but people who really do it because they've embraced it and they're like, I'm into this, You would definitely see, and those realms, by the way, are some of the most hideous realms to go to. They are horrible. You will see also those who dabble in those things, even out of ignorance. There are some really bad places there. You've got to be very careful. Stay away from that stuff. Stay away from it. Right. It's very, very bad. Then you have realms 3 and 4. The earth, and there are other worlds like this, not just physical worlds, but other worlds in other spheres, and that's the third dimension and the fourth dimension. These are the mortal realms. And the mortal realms are where the battles between good and evil occur within us and outside of us. We've talked a lot about that. So I think people probably get that general idea. That's what we experience in these mortal realms. The third dimension is the actual physical dimension that we reside in. The fourth realm is actually the astral dimension that overlaps our Earth, our sphere, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go into realms 5 and above, and there's an infinity of those. And once you hit realm 5 and up, you are going to go into the realms of light, and you go into an ever ascending. I'm doing things with my hands here, trying to talk with my hands, but you go into this ever ascending light. So, you can literally, every single realm that you traverse, you're going to a higher and finer frequency of light.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5th realm is a light realm, but the 23rd dimension is infinitely higher.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and so on and so on. And so there are these beautiful, beautiful places in those spheres. And so the universal sphere of realms gives us a general overview of how that works within our universe. But as I was traveling out of body, I would be shown this universal sphere of realms. And what is really important, and one of the things I find very interesting, is that I've seen a lot of artists have started capturing this in paintings. Mm-hmm. And so I know that other people are being shown the exact same thing that I've been shown. Whether they're consciously aware of it or not, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But they're being shown it because it's exactly, and so you're given, as you move through these rites of passage, initiations into the mysteries, that you go through different phases where you are given to reach and receive a higher understanding of the universal sphere of realms. Mm-hmm. And each one is subsequently more and more and more intricate. And as I would travel up and through these different gradations, it would be given to me in my hands, and it literally is like a swirling galaxy. And it becomes, as you continue to receive it, it becomes multiple swirling galaxies upon one another. And it's like what it does is, you're holding, it's always given to you in your hands, and you are, as you look upon it, it's like a map of the universe. Mm-hmm. And the little bit that I'm sharing right now with the spheres is just a small, tiny portion of it. Like you were mentioning, I talked about this sphere of vibration that people can go to, mm-hmm. where they will rise above the noise and the darkness and the din that we're experiencing down here below, and they will go into this peaceful space where a lot of teaching and instruction occurs, that you'll see how that flows right into that universal sphere. And it's just this beautiful map of the universe. And within this universal sphere of vibration and of realms, it's like you understand how the soul must move through these gradations in order to properly evolve towards the light and beyond. Mm-hmm. And it's like the information of it is subsumed into your soul, in a sense, in a way that it is energetically taken into you. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a beautiful thing. It's like when it is placed in your hands, or when you see it, because sometimes you'll also be taken to see it underneath an ancient stone, and the minute you see it, you have the same reaction. It's an ecstasy response. Right. It's like you're immediately in awe and in absolute ecstasy. You're like, and you understand what a great grace it is that you have been allowed to see this and to look upon it. It's very important.
Right.
And it's and so as you continue through the evolution, through the out-of-body experience, you'll be shown this many times, and each time it will get more intricate and more involved and more beautiful and bigger, and each time it will have something more to impart to you.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about the first and second realms, which is kind of like where the purgatories and hell realms are, but
Actually, no.
Oh.
Actually, let me clear that up.
Okay, yes,
The
please.
first and second realms are where the hell realms are. The third and fourth are the purgatory realms.
Okay.
We are in a purgatory realm. That's important for people to understand. That's where purification occurs, in purgatory realms. 3 and 4, the mortal realms, are purgatorial realms.
Okay. So we talk about, or it was mentioned that the second realm is kind of like where the dominant darkness resides. So what's the difference between the kind of like the first and second realm? Is there much of a difference, or are they generally just the same thing?
The big difference.
Okay.
Because what you're dealing with in the first realm is chosen evil, and in the second realm you're dealing with dominantly dark and ignorant evil. So you have the ignorant evil can be, there's a huge difference between the ignorance evil and the chosen evil in the first realm. The dominant darkness is obviously somewhere in between them. Dominant darkness is also somewhat chosen. It's definitely, all of it's chosen because it's compatibility. We go where we're compatible when we cross over. We are where we're compatible now. And so this is about compatibility. So the second realm it's a very uncomfortable place to be, but when you go to the first realm, it's like a terrifying place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you go to the first realm, it's so terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
The second realm, there are a lot of different, when I first started having to go to the hell realms, the ones within the second realms did scare me at that time. But, over time, I understood how they worked better. And, my purpose in being taken to those realms was to assist souls who were seeking to, move their understanding up and to reach to a higher light, to understanding, so they might be able to move higher. Because we are all required to give back to creation that which creation gives to us. So as I'm being trained, I'm expect to go back and help and train others. This is part of what, it's just a universal law that we have. And but I would find it very uncomfortable and scary at first. But over time, I was much more where I understood it. Didn't like going there, but it wasn't terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you go to the first realm, it is terrifying every time. You really it's just pure evil.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with the darkest of the dark. And so, there is a difference. A pretty strong difference. Just like, you're going to see a pretty strong difference when you go from, even just from, you see a lot of difference every
Mm-hmm.
time you take a gradation upward.
Mm-hmm.
So even in the light realms, you're going to see a huge difference in the difference of the higher, finer spheres of light and the frequencies. Even though they're all light, there's a huge difference between those gradations too. And so, I hope that's helpful.
Yes. So, so we're here in the third realm, but let's talk about the fourth realm, what's been named as the Astral Plane. Can you describe what the Astral Plane is and kind of what your experience is with it?
Well, the Astral Plane overlaps, our third dimensional physical type of reality. And again, we're not the only third dimensional type of reality. There's many purgatorial realms, and they reside in many different places. Some of them are physical, some of them are non-physical. The astral plane, as it relates to us here, is kind of like a bit of a mirror image almost, but not exactly, because things can be moved around a bit with when you go into the astral plane, things will appear differently in the room around you and whatever. But what you've got with the astral plane is going to be like the spiritual counterpart to the physical realm, for starters. So like when you split from your body and you're flying around, you're usually in the astral plane. It's often lit like twilight.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're going to see there is going to be a lot of things that are really related to the physical realm. You're going to hear a lot of the thoughts of humanity. You can usually hear thoughts, and you will also hear just a lot of jumbled thoughts, because you're hearing a lot of random thoughts that people have. So there's barriers that are not there.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a lot of lost souls, wandering spirits. So you have discarnate entities that reside there who are not moving on to a higher place. So you have a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
In the astral plane, you're dealing with a lot of just very grounded type things. And you're also going to deal with a lot of, you will run into a lot of spirits who are also, they're dealing with a lot of grounded type things, physical realm type things. Lost souls and wandering spirits are usually very attached to their previous life still. So there's a lot of karmic stuff that is being worked out there. There's a lot of deception, a lot of deceit. Things are not always what they seem. There's tricksters and things like that. You have to be very careful on the astral plane, because these are basically souls that have left their bodies, and they're not that much different from human beings. When you're traveling out of body, what you learn a lot in the beginning about the astral plane, but the purpose being to bypass it then, so that you can go into the higher spheres of light and learn a lot more, because what you're going to want to do is bring that light down into this realm, and then eventually also bring it down into the lower realms, because that's how we give back to creation. And so a lot of the teaching, the instruction, it goes on in these higher realms rather than in the astral plane. There will be some things you learn about there, like the thoughts being things, the fact that when you think something, it often appears before you. You'll learn a little bit about spiritual warfare in the astral plane. You'll learn a lot about ghosts and lost souls and how to help them. You'll learn about souls doing purgatory on Earth. Meaning that when they've crossed over, that they still have to wander the earth and do something for a time in penance for something, or something that they omitted during their life, or something thereafter. You'll see a lot of variations, but they're going to be very grounded things. They're very focused on the physical life.
Right.
The mysteries, the higher mysteries, they come in those higher spheres.
Right. So, talking about the angelic hierarchy, can you describe to us a little bit more of what that looks like? And the second part of my question is, for each level of hierarchy in the angelic realm, are they kind of dispersed between like each realm, or do they kind of reside in just one realm?
Okay. Actually, I have a couple of books that can help people with this stuff. Angelology and Demonology. They're both in the Overview series, which explains the hierarchies in both the angelic and demonic kingdoms according to the theological understanding. Primarily, those are pretty accurate. But what we see is in the angelic hierarchy, you have a whole host of different types of angelic beings. So you know, I've seen the cherubs. You see the great angels with the big white wings. I've seen what are called golden angels, who are the beautiful creatures who are, you know, evanescent with golden light. The archangels, and they all function according to what we have been, you know, what comes down to us through tradition. They are in that nature. And so those hierarchies are very accurate. And I believe most of those came to us from Dionysius in the very early church. And so but what we have is also there are others that are not so easy to fit into those simple categories. Like, for instance, there are teachers that we all have, and these teachers can be anything from, like, a lot of them are very much like, you know, old men or women with the white robes who come to teach us of certain concepts or spiritual things that we need to take upon us. They come in sequence, you know, so you'll have a one teacher who comes in to teach you about certain things that are necessary. For instance, you start out with oneness, and then you're going to start learning about discernment. So another teacher comes in to start with that, and then when you're done with the initial teachings on discernment, then another teacher comes in to start teaching you about karma. And then you're going to also see that you're going to meet with the souls and the spirits, the higher selves of people and souls that have interacted with you throughout many different lifetimes. And the higher self is the part of our soul that resides closest to God. So oftentimes we can meet with the higher self of a soul that has been part of our spirit's journey, who can give us knowledge and information about the karmic journey that we have with another soul, the different configurations that we haven't yet figured out, what we are not seeing, those kinds of things. Then you're also going to have all of these really fascinating, you know, creatures, you know, that are, that's not the right word, but you know, these angelic creatures of all different, you know, elementals, fairies, cherubs, but then not just beyond that, you have these angels of the mysteries. These are very different. You know, these can be angelic beings, but they don't appear just in the manner of like a Christian iconography perspective of an angel. These can come through many different religious conceptions of what an angel or a guardian might be. So, for instance, when you're going into the initiations into the mysteries, you might meet Thoth, who is the keeper of the veil, you know, and that's part of one of the initiations of the mysteries. When you go into the initiations of the mysteries, you might also experience the rite of passage into the living being that is the Sphinx, which is an angelic creature as well. Then you have these like ascended type souls who also operate in somewhat of an angelic way, but you would also not view them as such. They don't have wings, but they are of a much higher vibration than us, and they are teachers, but yet it's different. It's vibrational teaching. You have these, and these are beings that have moved beyond the earthly sphere of evolution, and so they are now giving back to us and helping us who are still remaining below to assist us to move to where they have gone. There are beings that you won't find, anywhere to have been written about in any book that I'm aware of, and I have a lot of books, so they probably haven't been, but there's an infinite number of spiritual beings that are part of the evolutionary process of any one individual, and just even the mysteries process itself. And then when you move towards the rites of the ascension, you're going to meet with the angel of the ascension, who is the angel. The angels of death are the black robed beings with the skeletons for faces in their hands, and the angel of the ascension is a white-robed being with light for a face and light for hands. And the angel of ascension comes to us when we are about to cross that barrier, in that we are no longer, when we die here, we are no longer going to meet death. We are going to ascend to a higher sphere, and that's when you meet with the angel of the ascension. But you're also going to meet with prophets, saints, mystics, and sages from all world religions and throughout the ages. So, for instance, White Buffalo Calf Woman, many of the prophets of many of the religions, the Buddha, Jesus Christ, Zoroaster, Avalokiteshvara, the Baha'u'llah. There's so many. And then I had a lot of really beautiful experiences with Paramahamsa Yogananda, but also with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. There is what I call the royal family of God, which is literally the family of the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics from throughout time, from throughout all the world religions and traditions, and they all work together in the ascension process, the purification process of humankind, and they work as, they are very much in alignment with, that same purpose of the angelic kingdom, in terms, because everything does work together. So there is no separation between them. Then, just to make it even more fun, then you have the different races of extraterrestrials who are also working in some type of angelic capacity. And, some of the ones that I have personally had contact with, a lot of contact with, because there's, other people have had contact with different ones, but the ones that I've had are the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, the Alpha Centaurians, and then I had contact with two different races that were so amazing, and they were so far beyond any of the others. I do not know where they are from, but I refer to one of them as the Tibetans just because they said they work a lot with the people of Tibet, and they couldn't communicate with more than, at the time, it was only 5 people on Earth, because our human minds are so restricted and so restrictive for them that, they had to find people that were able to receive. And this other race was so beautiful, and I had this unbelievable experience of being allowed to embrace this extraterrestrial and experience for a short time. I was transported to their world, which is in a much, much higher, finer vibrational sphere, and I truly did not want to come back. But I was able to see from that experience in many of these types what is actually possible. Mm-hmm. And again, bringing that back, the sacred hoop, bringing it back to the conclusion of what we started with. What is actually possible is, peace and harmony and love between peoples. The beauty that I saw in their world, it was just all light, all peace, all joy, and all love. And it was so all-encompassing. I couldn't put words on it. It's an experience I'll never forget. Mm-hmm. But again, all of these are parts of what I would, include within the angelic hierarchy. And that's why it makes it a big question, because they all work together, and then there's also, what a lot of people would probably associate them with mystery traditions, but the ascended masters, there's this temple within the sphere of the galactic heavens where the ascended masters reside. Mm-hmm. And so you have like Babaji and these other ones who are unknown, you meet them there, but they're not their names are not known on Earth. But these are also working with people on Earth. I think people would be surprised to know how much Archangel Michael and the archangels in general are involved in our world, and going back to bringing that around as well. One of the most amazing things that I've seen repeatedly is how St. Michael works to fight against these demonic hordes that we see build up in our skies and in our mystical spheres around humankind. And he literally, he's this huge, I'm talking about when you see St. Michael, he's not like a human-sized being. He's like, I would say he's like 50 feet tall, Mm-hmm. And he's huge with the wings, and he's so powerful, and he literally just moves through the ethereal wind, and with the power of a single thought, he can vanquish a demon and send it into the prison worlds below, the abyss where they have to go back. He can literally split the neck of a demon and send it back if it's here outside of eternal law. But again, that brings us to what we were saying about if they're here within eternal law, meaning that we are asking them to be here through our own thoughts, deeds, and actions and words and whatever, then that's not usually going to happen. But St. Michael is a very, very active force around the world, mm-hmm. and as well St. Gabriel. But the archangels do have a lot of as at least in terms of what I have personally seen, they are very, very involved in what's happening in our world, which we should consider a high, high honor, because St. Michael is truly a magnificent, magnificent being.
Right. So we have come to the end of our show. Thank you, Marilynn, for joining us once again. Just stick with us, and I'll get back with you here in just a moment. So great conversation tonight. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next time on Paranormal Engaged. As always, stay safe, stay healthy.
If you enjoyed our show tonight, head on over to Paranormal Engaged on Facebook and stay up to date on the latest news. And don't forget to click that like button. To find more about upcoming shows and guest information, stop by www.paranormalengaged.com. Paranormal Engaged can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and can be played on Alexa with a Podbean skill.